If you asked me to design an investigation which couldn't possibly find any effect between exposure to that stuff and some disease pattern, I think the EPA sort of hit upon the perfect design.
50 million tonnes of industrial waste is towering over the River Shannon. It's highly caustic and extremely dangerous.
There was cancer growths on top of animals. They were like a saddle. They were that big. They were oozing out with blood. And we made a decision, we lost all our income. And we never recovered from that because we could not expect people, or we put it into the food chain for that to happen. That is not us.
The fate of Aughinish Island, near Foynes, is expected to be sealed soon. A spokesman for Alcan, the international aluminium concern, is quoted this week as saying that they hope to be in a position within the next 6 months to make a decision on the location of their proposed 60 million pound processing plant. Aughinish Island is being hotly tipped as the site. An ore smelter here would undoubtedly provide many new jobs for the Midwest. But could it also cause permanent disfigurement to one of the most beautiful waterways in Western Europe?
The Shannon Estuary embodies a kind of serenity along its coves and little villages. But beneath that calm lies a sense of unease. You see, there are whispers of strange illnesses, dying animals, and all the clues point in one direction. This is Aughinish Island, and it's the site of Europe's last remaining alumina refinery. I'm on my way to meet Pat Geoghegan from the Kappa Farmers Support Group. He's agreed to meet me on his and Nuala's farm, but they don't live there anymore. The house is long since abandoned. He and his family forced out by pollution.
Like in 2006, I think, we stopped producing milk. It was our only income.
Why did you stop producing it?
Because the red toxic dust was blowing onto our farm. The caustic coming out of Aughinish. And we would get it here when it would come up. We'd get the burning of our skins, your face, your eyes would be burned. The cows would inhale it and it would get caught in their trachea going down and they start coughing and coughing and coughing. We didn't have a safe environment to produce our product. We were dairy farmers. When the EPA were telling us, oh no, there's nothing happening here. It's not Aughinish. Like they have 450 acres of a mud pond open to the elements below. And they were telling us that it wasn't leaving it, when it was blowing every day out of there. And still is to this day.
The refinery doesn't mine anything itself. It gets its bauxite from here. Guinea holds some of the richest reserves on Earth, and mining alone accounts for 21% of its GDP. It's used to make aluminium, the world's most used metal, from beer cans to aircrafts, smartphones, rockets, and missiles. At Aughinish, the rock is refined into alumina, the white powder used to make aluminium. But for every tonne of alumina produced, nearly 2 tonnes of waste are left behind. And that's the red mud in the dam at Aughinish. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Traces of heavy metals, radioactive elements, and caustic soda, enough to burn through skin. There's 450 acres of it. This vast expanse is the Bauxite Residue Disposal Area, or BRDA for short. There's already a disaster unfolding at Aughinish with frantic efforts underway to contain it. To record what's happening beneath the surface, dozens of boreholes are drilled into the ground and fitted with sensors. And it's at Plant Observation Well 17 that alarm bells are ringing. Pollution levels of aluminium over 2,600 times the EU limit. The safety threshold just 200 micrograms per litre. The pH is so caustic that the groundwater chemically resembles drain cleaner. Between 2019 and 2024, nearby observation wells consistently recorded aluminium concentrations between 30 and 50 times the EU limit. But why are the readings at well 17 thousands of times higher than wells just meters away? The problem is twofold.
The first is very human in nature. When the first cell of the BRDA was built in the late 1970s, it was left unlined, about 170 acres. It's engineered with a compacted clay base. Why? Because it was cheaper. The second problem is older, far older. The fate of the BRDA was sealed long before it was built.
The Burren is a familiar feature in Irish geography lessons, defined by its clints and grikes, its crevices and caves. They form an underground lattice of fissures and conduits between porous rock. But it's this same fractured karst limestone that runs beneath Aughinish. We have an unlined tailings dam storing millions of tons of caustic waste on a bedrock geology that is nothing more than a sieve. Modern engineering, environmental science and licensing standards would deem such geology fundamentally unsuitable for a structure of this kind. A recent groundwater report gives the impression that pollution levels at Aughinish have improved over time. But what accounts for the gap between that conclusion and what the raw data shows? The report imagines groundwater pollution as spreading evenly from the BRDA, like water through sand. However, the ground beneath Aughinish is a fractured maze of karstic limestone channels carved over millennia. Observation well 17 appears to tap into one of these hidden conduits, which would explain its significantly higher readings compared to surrounding wells. The report also relies on averaging methods. It blends data from up-gradient wells, wells with low flow, and even brackish-induced wells diluted by the estuary.
By averaging contaminated wells with clean ones, it creates the illusion of improvement where contamination still persists. But numbers can only hide reality for so long. The problems here go deeper still, beyond science, beyond denial. One could almost believe, from reading some of the documents prepared for Aughinish, that a tailings dam could simply never fail. In their environmental liability report, the worst-case scenario modelled wasn't the failure of a 50 million tonne red mud dam, it was a road tanker overturning. A catastrophic failure of the red mud dam was considered not a realistic scenario.
2010, Hungary, a tailings dam failure. A wave of red mud poured through villages and into the Danube. The dam had passed inspection only months beforehand, officially listed as stable. 10 people lost their lives and dozens were left with deep chemical burns. An inquiry pointed to weak design, poor oversight, and days of heavy rain. After the disaster, researchers found that caustic residue reacts chemically with the underlying geology and the liners meant to contain it. Exposure to the red mud causes the liners to degrade far faster than predicted. That same chemistry can also break down the mineral bonds within the dam wall and its foundation, a particular concern where limestone is present, as it is at Aughinish. The high pH attacks the calcium carbonate in the rock, gradually weakening the structure from below. For Aughinish, that means a chemically aggressive waste sitting atop a geologically dissolving foundation. Tailings dams aren't built like conventional dams. They grow gradually, layer upon layer, each new wall raised from the waste of the last. Over decades, that process creates an uneven structure, parts of the embankment dating back 40 years, while others are comparatively new. Different ages, different materials, different strengths, all bound together to hold back 50 million tons of toxic sludge. And it only takes 1 weak section for the whole system to fail. I filed a Freedom of Information request with the Department of Defense, the body responsible for national emergency coordination. I asked what plans were in place if the dam were ever to fail. They had no record. As it turns out, the body who were tasked with coordinating a response to what would be the largest ever industrial and environmental disaster in the history of the state is Limerick Council. From the get-go, the emergency response plan assumes that failure won't happen, so the whole document is written from that assumption. There's no large-scale evacuation strategy, no water protection protocol, no preparedness of any kind. 2015, Brazil, a tailings dam failure. Whole villages were swept away, buried under red sludge. 19 people lost their lives. The dam had already been flagged as potentially unstable, but operations continued. Weak design, poor monitoring, and days of heavy rain pushed it past the point of no return. Under Freedom of Information, a request was made to the Health and Safety Authority. Aughinish is the largest industrial site in the country, handling caustic chemicals under pressure, storing millions of tons of alkaline waste, and the authority responsible for safety has no record of looking. Another failure of accountability. A 2020 risk assessment states that overtopping is not considered a hazard as no water is stored on the BRDA. To say no water is stored there is technically true, only in the sense that this isn't a lake. However, it overlooks the constant presence of water, from suppression sprays, rainfall, and the site's own drainage and seepage control systems, all of which contribute to hydraulic loading. The BRDA remains uncovered, and in both Hungary and Brazil, heavy rainfall played a key role in their tailing dam collapses. There are many distressing details in this piece, but none sat with me more than this next bit. This building next to the BRDA hides an extraordinary failure. It's the Shannon Estuary water treatment plant, and whilst it's covered today, since the refinery began operations in 1983, and for more than 30 years after, its settling tanks were open, uncovered to the elements, exposed to the rain, dust, and whatever else the wind carried. For decades, the drinking water for tens of thousands of people sat uncovered beside Europe's largest alumina refinery.
Earlier this year, a viable explosive device was discovered at Aughinish. 2 canisters and a timing mechanism attached to a fuel tank.
There were fears it was linked to the war in Ukraine, a strike on Russian infrastructure. The refinery is owned by Rusal and has avoided sanctions despite its links to Moscow. As it turns out though, it was a case of mistaken identity. The bomber had intended to blow up the water treatment plant. Sabotage and environmental terrorism are the realities of the modern world, yet neither scenario appears in any of the emergency response plans obtained through Freedom of Information. And still, the greater danger may not come from intent, but from complacency. The 2020 risk assessment states that likelihood of collapse of the embankment wall was highly improbable to almost impossible. 2019, Brazil, a tailings dam failure, this time at Brumadinho, Minas Gerais. The dam was inactive, no longer taking waste, but still holding millions of tons of mud. It had been certified as stable just weeks earlier. $12 million tons of toxic sludge swallowed roads, farms, and buried the Paraopeba River. 270 people were killed, making it one of the deadliest industrial accidents in modern history. Aughinish now faces a legal challenge from local environmental groups over their plans to raise the BRDA once more. Part of their concern is the use of explosives near the BRDA. Every time the dam nears capacity, its height is increased, prolonging its life, but adding to the structural burden with each new layer. In 2023, Onboard Planola's inspector warned that a failure of the embankment wall would have very serious consequences. Yet its likelihood was described as highly improbable, almost negligible. I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the OPW, the organisation responsible for Ireland's flood defences, for any documents relating to potential flooding or embankment failure at the BRDA. What I learned didn't fill me with joy. They haven't inspected the dam in over 20 years, with their responsibilities at Aughinish ceasing in 2004. It's not clear why.
The state exceeds in deflecting accountability. Its neck nearly broken in half from looking the other way. All we have is the operator's self-assessment. There's no plan if the embankment were to fail. There's no independent modelling, monitoring, or inspections. As if tailings dams like this, man-made structures built from rock and waste, are somehow immune to failure.
2025, Zambia, a tailings dam failure, releasing 1.5 million tons of toxic sludge into the Kafue River basin. Environmental groups called it one of the worst ecological disasters in Africa's recent history.
The dam had been certified as stable earlier that year. The same pattern repeats: regulatory blindness, convenient paperwork, ensuing catastrophe.
And while disasters in South America and Africa might feel far away, the principle is no different here. Even without a collapse, waste from Aughinish still finds its way into the Shannon every single day. Rainfall and seepage from the BRDA are gathered in a perimeter inceptor channel that runs along the base of the embankment. Any water that percolates through the red mud flows out towards this trench. Across documents spanning decades, they continually point to zero discharge. But what that really means is that no raw runoff leaves the dam itself, but all that water still leaves the system eventually, collected, pumped, and discharged under EPA license conditions. They are permitted to release roughly 12 Olympic swimming pools of effluent per day into the Shannon. Within that flow, the EPA allows up to 2.3 tons of oxygen-demanding waste daily, about 3 times dirtier than a town's wastewater and 25 times higher than the background river level.
Everything we've seen, the lack of imagination, the fear of accountability, the questionable data extrapolation, none of it appeared out of nowhere. It has lineage, because if you want to understand how the state learned to look the other way, we have to go back to where it all started.
The Aughinish investigation set the tone for everything that followed. It was the state's official response to years of unexplained illnesses, miscarriages, and dying animals.
They were starting to go down. The animals were collapsing. Small ulcer was starting to be the size of a dinner plate, and into burst. You could put your fist through it. It was frightening. Like farmers couldn't face out in the morning here in the area. They'd have to have 10 cups of tea because of what they were going to face.
Completed in 1998 at a cost of £5.3 million, it remains the most extensive environmental health investigation ever carried out in Ireland. 5 volumes, hundreds of pages. It promised answers, but what it delivered was something else entirely. Even before its release, the investigation was already beginning to unravel. In the acknowledgements, one name stands out: Dr. Sarah Walters, Senior Lecturer in Public Health at the University of Birmingham. But that single mention is the only trace of her. Her full peer review, which was highly critical of the investigation's design, was removed before its final publication.
Her name remains in the acknowledgements, a breadcrumb trail leading to an erased review that unpacked the data manipulation within the report. The cancers, miscarriages, and animal deaths in Aughinish were real, but the report found nothing unusual there. But the evidence of what was altered still lingers in the pages that remain.
Data can be manipulated in many ways to tell many stories. Pollution spikes occur on certain days due to a confluence of factors. But when those spikes were averaged with dozens of nominal days, the pattern disappears. When it comes to blood sampling, this £5.3 million report admits that for several animal groups, there were delays and gaps in testing. In some cases, there were no baseline values at all, making any later comparisons scientifically meaningless. They acknowledge incomplete records, but draw conclusions as if nothing was missing. Problems too with the human blood samples.
Over 2 years we gave in maybe 20 samples or so. We were told that they were gone for testing. The next thing in June, we were told that our samples had gone missing. A doctor had told the inquiry team in writing that, in fact, our samples had already been tested and results were back from the state lab, and there was results coming back from a London lab. The internal inquiry found they were all lost to human error, but in fact, they had already been tested.
Testing was carried out by the Midwestern Health Board, but the results were never published. We don't know how many people were tested, what was measured, or what was even found. Only passing reference confirms that a human health study ever took place. It's an extraordinary omission, one that reveals a pattern. data averaged, baselines missing, and incomplete records presented as certainty. The final conclusions read as though every data set was whole, every figure beyond question.
The report treats illness as a statistical issue, not a medical one. A probability of less than 0.05, a standard fit for a laboratory, not a real-world health investigation. By doing so, its use of probability serves to diminish any notable effects from pollution. The criteria they set virtually guarantees real-world health effects would be dismissed as statistically irrelevant. As Professor Vivian Howard says,
I think the EPA sort of hit upon the perfect design.
the Aughinish report closed its pages without answers. 30 years later, only more questions arise. If you fell in, the vapour in the air would burn your lungs, and the residue from the Bayer process would cause deep chemical burns. In all likelihood, you'd probably die. Fortunately, the EPA say the mixture is non-hazardous. That being said, a leaked internal memo from one of their own inspectors in 1997 disagreed. For decades, the refinery has been one of the region's largest employers. Over 500 high-paying, highly skilled jobs right here in rural Ireland. These are the jobs that sustain families, fill schools and keep nearby towns alive. That's been brought into sharp focus in recent months with the announcement that Nestlé will close its infant formula plant in Aughinish with the loss of more than 500 jobs. These were long-term, skilled manufacturing and research roles, exactly the kind of work rural Ireland needs to keep people from leaving. They don't come in abundance, and retaining them should be a national priority. Reconciling the enormous social value of large-scale industry with the environmental damage it can cause is difficult. How can we have both the jobs and the communities that industry brings without sacrificing our land, water, animals, and public health? It starts by answering some questions. Dye packs in the groundwater wells would reveal how and how far underground contamination is being channeled. These answers exist, we just aren't asking the right questions. And this is where the state is supposed to function, where the EPA acts independently without fear or favour, where the OPW resumes its dam inspections instead of, I don't know, where the emergency coordination doesn't fall on an overstretched county council, but is led by the Department of Defence. Much, much more could be done to contain pollution at Aughinish. It just requires honesty and a genuine appraisal of the situation, acknowledging what's at stake. Because if there was an incident at the tailings dam at Aughinish, it would trigger panic across the country. The state would scramble to assemble a response that should have already existed. The release of caustic red sludge into the Shannon Estuary and the Atlantic Ocean would be catastrophic. The fishing industry decimated. As the fallout spreads, the deeper failure would reveal itself. The state's carefree attitude to accountability, the lack of oversight and culture of complacency would only deepen public anger. The inability to manage the disaster would become the catalyst for change and the birth of a new Ireland, a chance to build something better, a country that has zero tolerance for mismanagement and secrecy, a state that values accountability over convenience, and a public administration that works logically, transparently, and in the interest of the people who live here. Because the real disaster is already happening. The lack of accountability embedded in our institutions. The disinterest, the apathy, the quiet acceptance of total dysfunction. We all see it, and yet it's allowed to continue. But at what point do we demand change? And will it take a disaster to force us to build the culture of accountability we should have had all along?
Why we have fought this for so long is that when someone damages your kids and then they cover up for it, you're never going to stop.